Every Shabbat, we recite a Braita, a Tanaitic text known as Pitum HaKetoret, which is the recipe for the blend of spices used as incense, first in the Mishkan and later in the Beit HaMikdash. And it all begins with our parasha. Said God to Moshe, Kach lecha samim, take the following spices: nataf, ushchelet, stakti, and onicham, v'chelvanam, and galbanum, and mix them with livona zacha, with pure frankincense, all of equal amounts, and then grind them, said God. Mix them and offer them lifnei ha'idut, in front of the testimony, the Aron, that was in the Ohel Moed. And while I can easily recite the Hebrew names of these spices, and can almost do the same with their English translations, I have to admit that I have no idea what they are, what they smell like, or even taste like, with the exception of just one, the chilbana, the galbanum, because its characteristics were discussed by Chazal, who taught that galbanum, because its characteristics were so unique, galbanum had a foul odor, rechora, but when combined with the other spices of the Ketoret, created the reach nichoach la Hashem, a pleasant fragrance for God. So why include such a foul-smelling spice in the Ketoret? Why not use only those which collectively and individually had a pleasant scent? According to Chazal, to teach us a lesson, that what was true of the Ketoret is also true of a community, that there are times when we must be sure to include everyone, even Posh'ei Yisrael, even those who sin, who disregard the very beliefs that we hold dear. Why? Because a community that does not contain a measure of galbanum and is not open enough to include even those whose actions may be offensive to our sensitivities is a community that is incomplete, which, said Rabbi Meir Mirotenberg, is the source for the custom we have to invite everyone, sinner and non-sinner alike, to join us for Kol Nidre. And what strikes me so about this explanation is not only that it sheds light on the unusual preamble to the liturgy of Yom Kippur, but even more because it shows how open we need to be to all kinds of Jews, whether they represent a reach nichoach or chas v'shalom, a reach ram. How willing we should be to include everyone, whether we agree with them or not, whether we think they are wrong or not, into our community, which I know is preaching to the choir. After all, isn't a fundamental belief of our community that we believe in inclusion, and we believe in kiruv, and we believe that all Jews are part of a sacred family, and the sanctity of all Jews is inviolable. Not just those Jews we agree with, but even those we disagree with. So why do I mention this lesson this evening? Because there is one group of Jews that I fear we do discriminate against, and sometimes even exclude too often. Jews not to our religious left, but to our religious right. Jews who we may think are too parochial, too exclusionary, too insulated, and maybe even for some of us, a little too intimidating, which I've seen so often and believe unfortunately is true, that we're more welcoming and more comfortable with those to our left, those who don't challenge our Masorah and who are clearly religiously different than we are. But it's wrong. Because of all the people in this world with whom we have more in common, or at least we should have more in common, are those to our right, our fellow Orthodox Jews with whom we share the same Torah, the same core beliefs, the same mitzvot, and the same yearning to draw closer to God. And while we do have our differences, important ones we sometimes fight over, and ones that definitely at times can divide us, does it really make sense? Which is something that I've been thinking about a lot this past week, following a conversation I had with a colleague who asked me if after this is all over, if after we come out from under the shadow of the pandemic, will I be able to restore the relationships and even the respect I had with those who chose to ignore the safety standards that I fought for this past year, those who ignored science and medicine, or those who chose to study it like a pilpul with twists and turns, or even those who claimed that their faith, their emunah, was stronger than my hishtadlut, my efforts. Not that everyone to the right of us disagreed with us in this critical issue, because many stood shoulder to shoulder in our fight for our community's well-being. But there was, or at least there seemed to have been, a greater propensity in the community to our right to veer off course than we found in our community to the left. And the answer I gave my friend was that I don't know, but I hope so. Because we are not a people that is large enough to exclude even those who risked our lives by doing what they mistakenly thought was prudent or safe, proper or necessary. Many years ago, Rabbi Aaron Feldman, the Rosh Hashiva of Ner Yisrael, and one of the strident voices of separatism within the Haredi community, wrote a book called The Eye of the Storm. The positions he took in that book were strong, and the condemnations he had for many aspects of modern society were at times very harsh. Following its publication, the late Rav Aaron Lichtenstein Zatzal wrote a review in the OU's Jewish Action. Why? Because many of the issues that Rav Feldman wrote against are core to our identity as centrist Orthodox Jews. Wrote Rav Lichtenstein, if I may intrude a personal vein, Rabbi Feldman's persona arouses in me latent but very warm feeling memories. We were classmates during 1942 to 43 in the shir of Rabbi Yaakov Bobrovsky Zatzal at the Talmudical Academy of Baltimore. I, a spindly 9-year-old immigrant of limited social skills and dubious acculturation. He, a bit older, firmly entrenched in both a home of Lithuanian rabbinic stock and in his native American milieu. We were both eager and bright. He beyond that, to me, a tower of strength. He befriended me and invited me frequently to his home, wrote Reb Aaron. I still fondly recall the chilling warmth of joint sledding in Druid Hill Park on a Sunday afternoon. As my family moved to Chicago after a year, the friendship gradually dissipated. There were virtually no further contact of note, not even when some years later we both found our tents simultaneously pitched under the aegis of Mori Rabbi Rav Yitzchak Hutner Zatzal at Chaim, Berlin. But the memory and the appreciation linger. At which point, Reb Aaron offered his review and outlined his critique. But then he concluded, finally, if I may, I close as I opened, on a personal note. Dear Reb Aaron, that pair of juvenile prattling sledders is now past 75. Each has B'siaita D'Shemaya in successive contexts, respectively, learned much Torah and has been blessed with the ability and the circumstances to enable reaching out and personally transmitting to others that which we have been endowed. It stands to reason and is presumably mandated by joint mission that our worlds meet and attain mutual fruition. As we both painfully know, however, this occurs all too rarely. Must the walls that separate our communities and our institutions soar quite so high, the interposing moat plunge quite so deep? Shall we never sled again? Which really says it all. After all, if we really are committed to community, and if we really believe that all Jews should be part of that community, how can we allow the walls that separate us ever to be built so high that we can't reach out? True, our worldview may be different, but our Shulchan Aruch, our Rambam, our Gemara, our Torah HaKedosha are all the same, which may just be the other part of the message of the Ketores, the part that was so obvious to Chazal that they didn't even have to mention it, that it's not just enough to include the Chelvanam, to include those who may sin, whether they identify with our centrist Orthodox community or not, but that we also have to work with all of the other samim, all of the other sweet, smelling spices, the full spectrum of our Torah community to create a greater and sweeter whole, to serve as a unifying strength, a true reach nichoach before God, that beautiful fragrance that will fill our community and help us grow ever stronger. Shabbat Shalom.